The morning the HOA ordered me to sell my entire dairy herd, they stood at my front gate acting like the decision had already been made. The board president held up a certified letter, smiled for her own phone camera, and announced that my cows were lowering property values and violating community standards. She gave me 30 days to get rid of every animal or face crushing fines and legal action. My neighbors watched from across the road, expecting an argument, but I simply folded the letter, thanked her for delivering it, and walked back toward my barn. What she didn't know was that my family's dairy farm had been operating on this land decades before the subdivision ever existed, and every permit, inspection, and agricultural protection was still in place. She thought she was about to force me out of business. Instead, within 2 weeks, a state inspector arrived, and by sunset, the investigation had shifted away from my farm and landed squarely on the HOA itself. I inherited our dairy farm from my father, who had inherited it from my grandfather before him. For nearly 70 years, our family had raised dairy cattle on the same stretch of land without a single major violation. We weren't a massive commercial operation with hundreds of animals. We kept a healthy herd, supplied fresh milk to local processors, and took pride in maintaining clean barns, healthy livestock, and respectful relationships with everyone around us. The subdivision next to my property didn't even exist until about 8 years ago, when a developer bought the neighboring fields and built hundreds of expensive homes. At first, the new residents seemed friendly enough. Many stopped by with their children to watch the cows graze, and some even thanked me for preserving a piece of the area's rural history. That changed after a new HOA board was elected. The new president treated the neighborhood like her personal kingdom, constantly inventing rules she believed everyone should follow. Before long, I started receiving letters complaining about normal farm sounds before sunrise, the occasional smell that comes with livestock, and tractors using the access road during harvest season. Every complaint ignored one simple fact: my farm had been there first. I never bothered anyone, never crossed onto HOA property, and always followed state agricultural regulations. Still, the letters became more frequent, more aggressive, and more personal. Looking back now, I realized those early complaints weren't about solving problems. They were laying the groundwork for a fight the HOA believed it couldn't lose. The official notices started arriving almost every week. At first, they claimed my cows created an unreasonable nuisance for the community. Then they accused me of attracting insects, generating excessive noise, and damaging neighborhood property values. Every letter demanded that I correct the violation, but none of them explained how a working dairy farm was supposed to stop acting like a dairy farm. The strangest part was that my property wasn't even part of the HOA. My land had its own deed, its own tax records, and its own agricultural zoning. Still, the board acted as if their authority extended beyond the subdivision's entrance sign. Instead of speaking with me directly, they hired an attorney who mailed increasingly threatening letters filled with legal language designed to intimidate me. Some neighbors began avoiding eye contact, while others quietly admitted they thought the HOA had gone too far but were afraid to challenge the board. I kept every notice in a folder, dated each envelope, and resisted the urge to respond emotionally. Years of farming had taught me that patience usually beats panic. Then one afternoon, the HOA president appeared at my gate with 2 board members and proudly handed me what she called my final opportunity. According to the document, I had exactly 30 days to sell my dairy herd or face daily fines and a lawsuit. She looked completely certain she had already won. I simply accepted the envelope, wished them a pleasant afternoon, and started preparing for a battle they never saw coming. After the board left, I carried the letter into my office instead of tearing it up in frustration. I spread every notice they had ever sent across my desk and read them one by one. The pattern became obvious. Each accusation was built on assumptions rather than facts. They never cited a state law, only HOA bylaws that applied to homes inside their subdivision. My farm wasn't subject to those rules, no matter how many times they repeated otherwise. Even so, I knew ignoring them completely could become expensive if they dragged me into court. I called the attorney who had helped my father years earlier with an easement dispute. He listened carefully, then laughed softly before asking one question. Has anything about your farm changed since the subdivision was built? When I answered no, he told me to start gathering every permit, inspection report, tax record, and agricultural document I could find. He also reminded me that our state had strong protections for established farms operating legally before nearby residential development. That evening, I unlocked my father's old filing cabinet in the barn office. Inside were decades of neatly organized records, including inspection certificates, zoning approvals, and correspondence with state agricultural officials dating back years. As I sorted through the paperwork, I realized my father had prepared for disputes like this long before anyone imagined an HOA would be built next door. For the first time since receiving the ultimatum, I felt completely confident that facts, not threats, would decide how this ended. Over the next several days, I turned my kitchen table into a wall of evidence. Every permit was arranged by year, every inspection report was highlighted, and every tax document confirmed the property had continuously operated as a licensed dairy farm. My attorney helped organize everything into binders so that anyone reviewing the case could follow the farm's history from the day my grandfather bought the land to the present. While we were preparing, the HOA wasn't slowing down. They posted messages in the community newsletter claiming they were protecting homeowners from agricultural nuisances and hinted that legal action against me was only days away. A few residents believed every word, but others started asking uncomfortable questions about why the board was spending HOA money trying to control property that wasn't even inside the neighborhood. That growing doubt seemed to make the president even more determined. She began taking photos from the edge of my fence, recording videos of my cows, and encouraging homeowners to file complaints with county and state agencies. She clearly expected inspectors to arrive, declare my farm non-compliant, and give the HOA the proof it wanted. I didn't interfere or respond publicly. I simply kept caring for my herd, milking before sunrise, cleaning the barns, and following the same routines my family had practiced for decades. My attorney smiled when he heard about the complaints. He said if the farm truly met every regulation, the investigation might reveal far more than the HOA ever intended, and that possibility was about to change everything. About a week later, a white state vehicle rolled slowly up my driveway just after sunrise. The inspector stepped out, introduced himself politely, showed his credentials, and explained that his office had received several formal complaints about my dairy operation. I welcomed him inside without hesitation and offered complete access to the property. If someone was going to judge my farm, I wanted them to see everything instead of relying on exaggerated accusations. We started at the milking barn, where he examined sanitation procedures, checked equipment maintenance records, and reviewed animal health logs. He asked thoughtful questions about waste management, feed storage, water quality, and vaccination schedules. Every answer was backed by documentation. We continued through the pasture, inspected drainage areas, and compared my current operation to previous inspection reports already on file with the state. After nearly 4 hours, he closed his notebook and nodded with quiet approval. He told me the farm was clean, well-maintained, and operating fully within state agricultural regulations. Then, almost as an afterthought, he asked if the HOA had recently done construction along the shared boundary near the drainage ditch. I told him they had cleared vegetation, installed decorative fencing, and built a walking path only a few months earlier. His expression changed immediately. He asked me to show him the exact location. As we walked toward the property line, I noticed him studying the ground far more carefully than he had examined any part of my dairy operation. Something had caught his attention, and it wasn't my cows. When we reached the shared boundary, The inspector stopped beside the drainage ditch and quietly surveyed the area for several minutes. He measured the distance from the new fence to the waterway, photographed the freshly poured concrete along the walking path, and examined several stormwater drains that emptied toward the ditch. Then he asked a question that caught me completely off guard. Did this area always look like this? I told him it hadn't. Before the subdivision was built, the ditch had been wider, lined with natural vegetation, and designed to carry runoff away from surrounding farmland during heavy rains. The inspector compared the current layout with maps on his tablet and frowned. According to the official records, the HOA had altered part of the protected drainage corridor without obtaining updated environmental approvals. He explained that even small changes to regulated drainage systems could increase flood risks and violate state environmental rules. Within minutes, he requested additional documentation from his office and began taking even more photographs. By then, several HOA board members had noticed the state vehicle and walked over, clearly expecting to see my farm being sited. Instead, they found the inspector asking them for construction permits, engineering reports, and authorization records. The confident smiles disappeared almost instantly. When the HOA president insisted they were only beautifying the neighborhood, the inspector calmly replied that landscaping didn't exempt anyone from state regulations. For the first time since this dispute began, the board wasn't questioning me anymore. They were answering questions they couldn't seem to answer. The inspector returned 3 days later, but this time he wasn't alone. 2 environmental compliance officers and a county engineering representative accompanied him, each carrying maps, measuring equipment, and thick folders of property records. Instead of walking toward my barns, they headed straight for the HOA's newly built walking path and landscaped entrance. Curious homeowners gathered nearby, expecting to watch another inspection of my farm. What they witnessed instead left the entire neighborhood silent. The officials marked several locations with bright survey flags and compared the construction to the approved development plans on file. It didn't take long before they discovered multiple discrepancies. Sections of the drainage channel had been narrowed, retaining walls had been extended beyond the permitted boundary, and stormwater runoff had been redirected without the required approvals. One officer explained that these changes could increase flooding on neighboring agricultural land during heavy storms. The HOA president repeatedly insisted the work had been approved by their contractor, but the officials reminded her that responsibility remained with the property owner and the association. Before leaving, they issued formal notices requiring the HOA to preserve the site exactly as it was until the investigation was complete. The same neighbors who had watched me receive violation letters now watched board members signing official documents instead. As the state vehicles pulled away, several residents approached me to apologize for believing the rumors. I thanked them politely, but said very little. The facts were finally speaking louder than the accusations, and the investigation was only beginning. Within the next 2 weeks, the story spread far beyond our neighborhood. Residents who had once believed every warning in the HOA newsletter started demanding answers at a special board meeting. Instead of discussing my dairy herd, homeowners wanted to know why association funds had been spent chasing a lawsuit against a farm that wasn't even under HOA authority. The treasurer admitted that thousands of dollars had already gone toward legal fees, private consultants, and repeated complaints to government agencies. That revelation shocked many families who had assumed their dues were being used to maintain roads, landscaping, and community amenities. My attorney attended the meeting as an observer, saying almost nothing while homeowners questioned the board for nearly 2 hours. The president tried to defend every decision, insisting she had acted to protect property values, but she couldn't explain why the association ignored legal advice warning that my farm was protected under state agricultural law. When someone asked whether the board had verified its authority before threatening me, the room fell completely silent. By the end of the meeting, several residents submitted a petition demanding an independent review of the board's actions and finances. As I drove home that evening, I passed my cows peacefully grazing in the pasture, completely unaware of the chaos unfolding next door. It struck me that the animals the HOA had called a problem had never caused any real trouble. The real damage had come from people who believed confidence could replace knowledge, and that mistake was finally catching up with them. A month after the first inspection, the state released its findings. My dairy farm passed every review without a single violation related to the complaints the HOA had filed. The report confirmed that my operation complied with state agricultural regulations and that it qualified for legal protections because it had existed long before the subdivision was built. The HOA, however, received a very different outcome. Investigators concluded that portions of its landscaping and drainage modifications had been completed without the required approvals, and the association was ordered to correct the violations within a strict deadline. Ignoring those orders could lead to significant penalties. Faced with mounting legal costs and growing pressure from homeowners, the board's attorney contacted mine to discuss a settlement. Every fine the HOA had issued against me was immediately withdrawn, and they agreed to stop all enforcement efforts involving my farm. They also acknowledged, in writing, that my property was outside the HOA's jurisdiction. News of the agreement spread quickly through the neighborhood. Many residents who had avoided speaking to me for months stopped by the farm to apologize. Some even brought their children to see the cows again, just like they had when the subdivision was first built. The atmosphere changed almost overnight. The conflict that had started with threats and intimidation ended with the truth laid out in official documents, proving that facts and patience had accomplished what anger never could. After the settlement, things inside the HOA changed faster than anyone expected. The board president resigned within days, citing personal reasons, but everyone knew the real reason was the pressure building from homeowners and the state investigation. 2 other board members stepped down shortly after, leaving the association scrambling to rebuild leadership. An emergency election was scheduled, and for the first time in years, multiple residents actually ran for positions on the board instead of avoiding them. Meanwhile, I was no longer receiving threatening letters or late-night emails demanding I remove my cattle. The silence from the HOA office felt strange at first, like a storm that had suddenly passed without warning. My attorney confirmed that all legal threats against my farm had been permanently dropped and that the association had formally recognized my agricultural rights. One afternoon, a group of new board candidates visited my property. Instead of accusations, they asked questions about how the farm operated and whether I had suggestions for improving cooperation between residents and agricultural landowners. I kept the conversation simple. I told them respect works both ways, and problems grow quickly when assumptions replace facts. A few of them nodded thoughtfully, clearly realizing how far things had gone wrong before. For the first time since this entire situation began, the relationship between my farm and the neighborhood wasn't built on conflict. It was starting to shift toward understanding, even if trust would take much longer to rebuild. A few months later, life on the farm finally settled back into its normal rhythm. The cows still woke me before sunrise, the milking routine stayed the same, and the fields carried on as they always had for generations. But something around us had changed. The new HOA board, now made up of residents who actually lived in the community rather than people chasing control, quietly removed several of the stricter policies that had sparked the conflict. Instead of issuing threats, they began holding open meetings where farmers, homeowners, and local officials could speak directly to each other. One afternoon, I was invited to attend as a guest, not as an opponent. Standing there in front of neighbors who had once seen me as a problem, I explained the history of the farm and the importance of understanding property rights before making decisions that affect others. There were no arguments, no accusations, just listening. After the meeting, One of the new board members walked with me back to my truck and admitted they had no idea how much legal protection agricultural land actually had in the state. I told them that was exactly the issue from the beginning. As I drove back down my long dirt road, the sun was setting over the pasture, and the herd moved calmly across the field. The HOA hadn't destroyed the farm. Instead, it had accidentally reminded everyone that some things existed long before rules were written, and those things deserve to be understood, not fought against.